So I made this about 10, 11 years ago when I was coming off of some nasty stuff. So it looks kind of crazy. Um, and I just needed something to do. You could see my hands were extremely shaky. It's the Trinoctony of Mithras, and strong evidence suggests that Mithras was Perseus. And you see the dog, which is unfinished, and the snake, which is unfinished, and I didn't have the scorpion. It's completely unfinished, but it reminds me of a time when I actually had the power to get off of something that most people um, die from or wind up relapsing to, and it's been, I think this is over 11 years ago. It's been yeah, well over a decade since I've touched any of that garbage. So kind of a piece of my history right here, even though it's kind of crappy and jacked up. I, you tend to hallucinate pretty badly when you're coming off the garbage, but you guys can kind of understand. Now, Josephus. Now, there are people who claim that every mention of John the Baptist or James the brother of Jesus or John or Jesus himself throughout all of the works um, of Josephus are forgeries. This is believed by almost nobody. And I say almost nobody because there's kooks in every field. I mean, there's scientists that believe in homeopathy and water memory. Um, there are doctors that believe that chiropractic can cure cancer and all sorts of crazy shit, you know? Um, there's people who, the global warming thing, there's plenty of scientists that disagree with global warming or agree with it. I don't know what side issues you guys are on, but the one thing that they're pretty sure on is there is an interpolation, and it's not even a sentence long, um, because the manuscripts that we have are across so many different cultures. We have it in Latin, Slavonic, Syriac. I believe it's even in Celtic, but the Arabic source does not have a part where it says Jesus who Jesus who is the Christ, um, or something like that, or called Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, um, or it's called the Messiah. Now nobody knows which way that went. Did the Muslims change it to fit their um, uh, what's it called, theology? Did interpolation happen early on to the Western manuscripts, and that's what happened? But everything else lines up about John the Baptist, about the family of Jesus, especially James, because James was a troublemaker too. And we find this in um, the Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish Wars. So let's go through some of them. All right. Now, we have references to James, the brother of Jesus. Again, why would a Jewish guy, Jewish Pharisee on the side of the Romans, be talking about a brother of a guy who didn't exist, right? Now, and then he also mentions Caiaphas and Ananias and all these people who are in the Bible, and we've in the New Testament, and we found some of their tombs. We found Caiaphas's tomb. Josephus records a guy named Joseph Caiaphas. We found his ossuary. Um, so I won't read all the paragraphs about it, but it's only a sentence fragment that might be an interpolation. Well, it's either interpolation one way or the other. We don't know. Did the Muslims change it, or did an early Christian say, "Well, we already know who this is talking about"? But as for all the paragraphs surrounding it, and all the sentences surrounding that, no, they're identical. Why the Muslims? Yeah, no, they're not. This was not made out of whole cloth. So let's get into it. Da, 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 da. Um, I'm just looking for a good part to start at. The eldest Ananias proved most unfortunate, for he had 5 sons, and all performed the office of the high priest of God, who had himself enjoyed the dignity a long time formerly, which never happened to any other of our high priests. But this younger Ananias, a bold man in his temper, very insolent, he also of the sect of the Sadducees, remember the Sadducees, um, who were very rigid in judging offenders above all the rest of the Jews, and had already observed when, therefore, Ananias was of his disposition, and thought that now a proper opportunity, Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road, and so he assembled a Sanhedrin of judges, and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, called, not who was the Christ, whose name was James, and some others. And when they had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. But as for those who seemed most equitable of the citizens, and such were most uneasy to breach at the breach of the laws, they disliked what was done, and also sent to the king, desiring him to be sent to Ananias, that he should act so no more. For what had already been done was not justified. Some of them went also to meet Albinus, and he was upon his journey to Alexandria, um, and informed him that it was not lawful for Ananias to assemble the Sanhedrin without his consent, whereupon Albinus complied with what they said, and wrote in anger to Ananias, and threatened that he would bring him to punishment for what he had done, and on which Agrippa took the high priesthood from him when he had ruled but 3 months, and made Jesus, son of Damascus, high priest. Jesus is just Joshua, is just the name Joshua, right? Translated into Greek. That's all it is. So that Jesus is not speaking about Jesus of Nazareth. But this one right here, where it says, when it's talking about James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ, right? Josephus reference to John the Baptist. Now, some of the Jews thought that destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that verily justly punishment as they did against John, who had been called the Baptist, for Herod slew him, and he was a good man. Herod feared lest the great influence John had over the people might put it into power of inclination to raise rebellion. Accordingly, he was sent to prison out of Herod's suspicious temper, to Macharius, the castle I before mentioned, and was there put to death. Now, what I'm reading from is actually, I'm just because I need the quotes quick, is from Wikipedia, but I will link um, uh, the Antiquities of the Jews and Jewish Wars in the description, and you can read these in full for yourself because there's a lot more. I just want to give you an overview, okay? Um, about this time, a wise man, indeed one, if, if indeed one ought to call him a man, and this is where the interpolation might come in. For he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people who accepted the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many Greeks. He was called the Christ. And when, upon accusation, the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, who had first come to love him did not cease. Those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, sending a third day restoration to life, for the prophets of God foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of Christians so called after him still to this day have not disappeared. Does that sound like a ringing endorsement of Jesus? No. That's just what they believed. Everybody knew that the Christians believed that Jesus ascended on the third day. Or not ascended, but resurrected, restored to life, right? And they're talking about, and these Christians still exist to this day, right? And this was written around, what, AD 97? So, now, are there variants in sources? There's variance in every single source. In every single, even in printed books, there are variants. No joke. In hand copied things, there are variants. Misspelling of a word is a variant. If I copy something down, right, and I spell I'm typing, and I type TH, and I think I hit the E, and I don't hit the E, and that's a variant. Somebody can come along and say, look, there's a variant there. We're not sure of what this word means. Yeah, I mean, we know it's because of the context and because of all the other versions that are out there that, every other copy that's out there has THE. Not to mention there wouldn't be enough space for anything else except something like thy, which basically is the same meaning, but nobody uses that anymore. Now I'm not going to go through the other things where it talks about more about John the Baptist and Jesus and James, because they talk about him more. They also talk about John, the disciple of Jesus, and other Christians in these other places. So, yeah, Josephus, all copies of Josephus, both Antiquities and the Jewish Wars. Um, who had all of the copies um, to put in the exact same wording and everything, even though it's the grammar and everything looks and sounds exactly like Josephus, doesn't sound like anybody else. You know, nobody had control over these copies. You had, you know, Slavonic version, Latin version. I think there was a Greek version, the Arabic version, and there were not just one in each. There was a few in each. A few, what's it called? Manuscripts. But Arabic, Syriac, Slavonic, Latin, and multiple copies. And nobody held these at one point, right? I mean, the church did not become tolerated until Constantine had the Edict of Milan in AD 313, and then it was just tolerated. But then persecution began again, and that's what kicked off the war with Licentius. And then Constantine had to take the eastern part of the empire, and then you didn't have Christianity becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire until Theodosius, which was 100 years later, right? So I mean, it's just ridiculous, and nobody mentions this. I mean, with all the infighting and the factions, especially with the Arians, um, or even before that with the Sabellianists and the Montanists and the Gnostics and the Judaizers, nobody mentions that, hey, look, they're forging this. They certainly bitched and complained about the forgeries of Irenaeus because we know, or Ignatius of Antioch, because we know the authentic letters of Ignatius of Antioch, and forgeries got called out all the time. But yeah, there might be a slight interpolation in 3 words within a paragraph, but to suggest that every mention of John the Baptist, of the Christians, of Jesus, of James, the brother of Jesus, and of John the Apostle over 2 works of Josephus, Antiquities and Wars, across multiple cultures, some not even Christian. And the Jews even had copies of this, and they hated Jesus. That somehow they're all that identical forgeries in the same places got in. I mean, it just is ludicrous. So, all right, peace to you, and I'll put the links in the description. And you should read Antiquities and Jewish Wars, like I did. Like I don't want to say his actual name. I can't pronounce his name on here. He's a friend of mine. He's the Catholic that talks about the Filioque. Like James at Pandora's Box, who's a Gnostic. Like David Witham did. Like Gambler did. I mean, be educated. This is a part of Western civilization. You'll learn a lot about the Roman Empire. Same with reading Tacitus. He was a good historian. All right, peace to you.